Welcome to the UX Coach podcast. I'm Andy Parker, and this is the show where we explore careers in digital design. Well, you made it. This is our debut episode, and boy, have we learnt a lot already. It's not as easy as you think it might be to stitch something like this together, you know. Keeping things agile and lean. We are always looking for feedback. Details of how to do that will be available at the end of the show. So in this first episode, I met with Mark Branigan, Head of Research at Hippo Digital, a digital service design consultancy from the UK. We talked about his career to date, what it's like being responsible for the hearts and minds of future generations, and how a move into civil service opened his eyes to the amazing world of user research. We also discussed whether there is such a thing as being a mid-weight designer and what it really means to be a lead or a senior user researcher. So let's not hang around for too long. Why don't we jump straight into this interview? Mark, thank you very much for joining the first ever UX Coach podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I thought we'd just start off by going through a little bit of background. So tell us about what it is that you're doing right now.
Okay. At the moment, I am head of profession for user research at Hippo Digital, which is a digital agency based in Leeds. We work all over the country. I've got a team of about 16 or 17 user researchers underneath me, which is made up of kind of makeup of permanent people. I think I've got about 7 permanent people, and the rest are made up of contractors or interims. So I guess my job is to kind of help them develop, make sure they're in the right places, and make sure especially, I guess, make sure the permanent people that I've got are developing through their career and turning from researchers into brilliant researchers.
Amazing. So there's some pretty big teams there then. There's quite a lot of people. Is this the first time that you have been in a position where you've been managing teams of that size?
No, I've managed teams before. I'm in my early 40s at the moment. I think the first team I managed was in my kind of mid 20s, and like anybody at that age, I made a horrible job of it. All the mistakes you could possibly make, I did. I then did that again when I was about 35, despite having promised myself that never again would I ever manage people. But I did it again when I was about 35, 36, had a little bit more funding. It had a team, I think only of about 4 people. And then almost accidentally found myself in this particular role at the moment. So I guess it's kind of the sum total of an awful lot of terrible management mistakes that I've made in the past, from which I've learned a great deal. That have kind of helped me make this work.
Right. So, being that it's a few things that you've ended up being involved in, where you've become a manager or responsible of people. If you take yourself back to an earlier time, was that something that you had in mind was where you wanted to go with what you were doing? What's your actual background? Where did you start off? Did you go to college or?
I went to university. I'll be absolutely honest, I didn't really get on with university. I was doing an arts degree, and this is nothing against people who do arts degrees, because I think they're really important. But for me, it was a very, very low amount of lectures per week. I think it was about 7 hours of lectures per week, and that just left me with far too much free time. And I really like to be busy. So that didn't really work out terribly well for me. So I left well before finishing my degree, and just got a succession of jobs, built up lots of experience that way. There was no real, I guess, career plan at the time. I think when I first started out, in your early 20s, the career path appears to be start doing a job, work up to being a manager, and then that's kind of your career. I think it's once you become a manager that you realize it's not actually the greatest thing in the world, and there's plenty of ways to develop your career really, really well without ever being a people manager. So I kind of shied away from that at that point. I did an awful lot of different things. I was a tech consultant for EE, as is now, Orange as was then. Did a lot of call center work. Then I went into the financial services industry, became a pension and investment salesman. Then when the bottom fell out of that in 2008, I found myself looking for something completely different, and I never really got on with the financial sector either. So I ended up completely by mistake signing on, and then being asked by the job centre representative whether or not I wanted to work there. So I was like, okay, great. And so I applied. Worked in the job centre for several years. Really enjoyed it. Had a little bit of a family, a big family disaster, and that made me kind of get my finger out and sort my life out a little bit. So I applied to the fast stream. The civil service fast stream. Then from there, I became a security architect for a little bit. Really, really enjoyed that. And then got this interesting opportunity to go and do a little bit of work experience with GDS. And this was around about the time where the coalition government had been in power for a little while. Obviously, we knew for a fact that the Labour government were going to win next time round, without a doubt. And the first thing they were going to do was, knock these idiots who wear shorts and jeans and shit all day at work and knock them straight into next week and forget about them. So everyone said I was mad, but I thought now is a good time to do it. I didn't really care what the job was. It was user research. I was there for about 3 weeks, and I knew straight away that this was absolutely the thing I should have been doing with my life the entire time. So I stuck with it. Left the fast stream, stayed as a user researcher. I guess I joined technically as a junior user researcher, although that job title was never really floated. And from there, stayed there for a couple of years, and then when my wife was expecting a baby, moved back north, got a job as a senior UX consultant with an agency in Leeds. Stayed there for a short while before going contracting, and to be fair, I was never comfortable with the term senior. And it's interesting what you were saying earlier about this kind of like role definition between the words junior and the word senior, and then you've got this kind of this nonsensy midweight thing that sort of sits in the middle. I'm completely with you. I'm not sure it carries, for want of a better word, midweight doesn't carry much weight as a term. So once I went contractor, I never really sold myself as a senior user researcher or a junior user researcher, just purely a user researcher. Because, what's senior? I'm 41. I'm not terribly old.
Well, let's talk about then. So when you think of this, because I find it quite fascinating. I feel like there is, as we were saying before we started, of the idea of a midweight designer is a non-term. You're just a designer, and it's just acknowledging that it's the period in your career where you're no longer a junior and you're becoming the master of your craft, right? And then there's this assumption of like that senior means that you have reached a level of proficiency and expertise within what you're doing. But I don't really see that as being something where it's necessarily like a term of service. Like it doesn't necessarily mean that you've done the job for 5 years or you've done it for 10 years, because if you go on what I think is now becoming a little bit of a redundant sort of concept, but the idea of like the 10,000 hours to expertise in a particular field, you could be someone who is night and day doing something and you clock up those 10,000 hours really fast. Someone else could be doing it over a much longer period of time. So what for you, what do you see as being that what senior means?
It's a really good question. Just to sort of reiterate what you've said there, I completely agree with you. And something I say to my team on a very regular basis is it's not the length of time you've been doing it, it's kind of the miles on the clock that you've put while you've been doing it. So I think that's probably what senior means. It's kind of like, what's the breadth of stuff that you have done with the time that you've been doing it? Some people may have been doing exactly the same design or research job for several years. That's a really good way of putting it. Other people might have spent the same amount of time doing lots and lots of different things. It's a big difference, isn't it? I mean, to give you an idea of my own career, I think I've covered things from procurement to e-commerce to Windows operating systems, funerals, tax, sexually transmitted diseases, all kinds of weird and wonderful stuff. But, all of that condensed into quite a short period of time, I guess.
So your experience within the government digital services in the UK, I think, provides an interesting insight, because there's something that I've noticed about it since its inception is that there's been some pretty hard and heavy decisions made as to what constitutes the makeup of a service team, right? And you will not see the term user experience anywhere within that makeup. You have user researchers, you have content designers, UI designers, developers, etc., etc. And it makes me wonder whether we are finally reaching the point of the death of UX, so to speak, as a job role, and going back more into the kind of like similar to what's happening on the high street, where everyone was so good at, we go to the big supermarket and everything. Now we actually really want the butchers, the bakers, and the fishmongers. We want to go to the specialists. Yeah. And whether this is what we're starting to see now, is this more of the focusing on those specialist disciplines and then becoming an expert in those areas, and less of the generalist, as you and I have had with our careers, where you've been involved in lots of different things, you've seen lots of things, and that's what gives you seniority, is like you say, is the kind of, you've seen too much, you've got the scars.
Yeah. Although I'd never describe myself as other people, and this is going to sound like the most David Brent thing in the world, but other people might describe me as having seniority. I would never think of myself as having seniority. I've just done lots of stuff, and that's kind of a different thing. I might pick and be a little bit controversial and say I don't know whether I agree with the idea of the death of the term UX, because I still think there's a value in that phrase. And outside of UK government stuff, the term UX is still actually used pretty commonly, usually more towards a design thing than a research thing. So I think maybe UX has been divorced from UR to an extent, although the two things are still very much linked. But that's not to say it's gone away. And I don't know. I mean, what would I replace that term with, maybe? I mean, is it interaction design? Because I think interaction design doesn't quite go as far as UX design. If you think of UX in the purest sense, like user experience, it's a lot bigger than just interaction. It's probably bigger than user research, but they all sort of tie together. So maybe it's not dead. Maybe it's just becoming more of a kind of woolly umbrella term.
I think it's maybe going back to where we started, which is it's that acknowledgement of that it is the encompassing phrase for a series of disciplines, and a lot of those disciplines are not things.
And content design gets forgotten a lot in this too.
Absolutely. And there was actually a discussion, a big debate that ended up kicking off on Twitter last week with a few well-known names around whether anyone had information on what the career path today looks like for an information architect. And there was some sort of quite inflammatory responses to that, of like, that's actually still a profession. And I thought, well, of course it is. But maybe we're talking about it in slightly different ways now, of that we've got the people who look at the infrastructure side of it. You've got data science, and, there's always still going to be a database architect of some kind. It might just not be called that. And then content, obviously, is the other part, the thing that you're storing, why you're storing it, how you want to access it. So I think there's lots of interesting avenues there. All of these specialist things culminate in UX. I suppose what I'm trying to explore with this whole concept is whether we actually can still justify having a single individual with it as a job title. But then, like you say, is how do you then replace it with something else?
That's the trick. And also, it's quite an entrenched term as well. So in the nicest possible way, perhaps it's a little bit beyond us for where we are as a profession at the moment to say, right, we've had enough of the term UX, when you still have to speak the language that your clients speak. So if your client is looking for a UX architect or a UX designer or even a UX researcher, these are the job titles that they use. You know what you do. I don't really get that worried about terminology, to be totally honest. I worry more about the, for want of a better term, the content of what it is that I do and the services that I provide.
Right. So it's the focusing on the outcomes of what you're trying to achieve, and you're using the various different things that you know how to approach as the tools that you're doing it with. Okay, so we talked a little bit there about like seniority. I kind of want to go down through the stack a little bit, if you like. So you're currently a manager or a head of, you manage people. What is the responsibility of a manager in the broadest sense?
For me personally, it sounds trite, but it's absolutely true, is for the people who work for me to be better at this than I am, and to eventually replace me.
It's the end game for everyone, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
And what about going one level down, if we think of it in the sort of the classic hierarchy? There's this concept of a lead, so lead designer, lead researcher. What do you see as being the difference between someone who is in a management or head role and someone who is in a lead role?
This is a really good question. And funnily enough, your timing couldn't be better because I'm in the process of putting together a kind of progression matrix for my team as we speak. And I've kind of amalgamated the terms lead and senior. If I think about what the difference is between lead and head, then I would think of my lead stroke seniors, if you want, to be people to whom I can delegate work. They can help bring up people who are lower down. Lower down is such the wrong word, but a more like entry point of that matrix, I suppose. And it would be their job to kind of help bring them up further while I'm able to kind of coordinate things, make sure people are getting the training that they require, make sure I'm having the sort of the financial arguments to make sure we can afford the training that they require, and just making sure they have all the tools they need to be able to do their job.
Is there anything in the concept of a lead being more focused on the tasks and the work over people?
No, I wouldn't like that.
The idea of having a team lead, what is it that you're leading?
I suppose they're setting the strategy, which means kind of planning the whole map of what the research for a particular thing is going to look like. I don't think I would have a lead researcher who is responsible for several researchers over several projects. I think I would probably have a lead researcher who is responsible for a particular project, and they might have researchers working with them. They would be setting the strategy. They would be making the plans for research. They'd be the people working with the senior stakeholders, if there are such things, product owners, etc., to make sure that kind of the right thing is being delivered, which I guess devolves the responsibility of actually carrying out the research more to the researchers rather than the lead. So that's not to say that those people are not responsible for, the lead people are not responsible for people to a certain extent as well. Because, they still remain responsible for those researchers' well-being while they're at work. And it's not just a task-based thing. I guess maybe I'm looking for unicorns. I don't know.
Would you say then, whilst a lead is still potentially a practitioner, they quite possibly are actually involved in carrying out that research in this particular example or design?
Yes. Yeah. And you know what? I don't know. I think a lead or a head even still needs to keep their hand in and keep the skills relevant.
So how do you find that so far with this new role that you're in of the opportunities to keep involved in doing the job?
Well, effectively, I'm doing two full-time jobs. I'm doing the job of head, and I'm doing the job of a user researcher as well. So, yeah, I'm constantly involved in research. And to be fair, that's kind of the way I like it. The thing is, we all got into user research because we really enjoy it. Certainly the people who've stayed with it for any length of time, this is a very fun job to do. I wouldn't want to imagine that I never do any research anymore. And why would I expect anybody to listen to me who doesn't do any research?
There's a sense there of that to get the confidence and the buy-in, if you like, from the people that you bring into your teams. You need to show that you can still do the do. Of
course. I wonder if occasionally, in the dark moments in hotel rooms by yourself, you do wonder whether that's what they expect or whether it's your terrible fear that you are no longer relevant. So you've got to keep your hand in and show that you can still do it. And, you're still, potent and thinking and all that sort of thing.
So with that in mind, then, what are the characteristics of, if there's someone listening that's thinking about what's going on with their career, they're currently practicing this, perhaps they've been made aware of that there is a new role that's coming up, which is a lead or a manager role. How do you determine whether that is the right thing for you or not?
First of all, I would probably ignore the word whether it's a lead role or a senior role or anything like that, and look at what the job is actually asking you to do. Some places are more mature than others. So a senior researcher at one place might have some staff that are working for them. A senior researcher at another place might need someone who has done user research to bring user research into their organization, and those are wholly different things. So it's not as simple as saying, do you feel like a lead, in which case go for it? Do you feel like a senior, in which case go for it? It's all dependent on what the job is and who the job is for. And we're user researchers. Ask the question, find out more. I'd also say that I think a lot of people still kind of undervalue their own ability. So maybe they've been doing this for a few years, but they still kind of view themselves as a junior, which other people in the industry don't necessarily. I almost take the hump with the word junior, but we'll come back to that at another point. So they wouldn't feel comfortable kind of applying for a senior or a lead job. I don't think I've ever applied for a job as a senior or as anything like that. I think I've just been asked to do senior type things in inverted commas because of the work that I've been doing once I've actually been on a project.
So it's more of those strategic responsibilities. So what do you think constitutes as being strategic tasks, those things which are considered to be, you have to have experienced this previously in order to be able to make the decision?
Yeah, and this is a good one. I was really lucky when I first started out in user research because my mentor was really, really quick to explain to me what the difference was between something strategic and something tactical. So for me, something strategic is something that you're going to need to think about over the course of action. It's more contributing to a bigger picture. It's as simple as that. And a tactical thing is something that needs to be sort of dealt with right now and is more kind of reactive, I suppose, for want of a better word. So again, I mean, I did get lucky that maybe there was an element of asking the right questions, but maybe that's the answer for people is, just keep asking the questions, be inquisitive, because that is exactly what a good user researcher, junior, senior, whatever you want to call it, that's what a good user researcher should do, is just keep asking questions. And that the big picture thing, I think, is what drives a lot of user researchers, because they're looking at, well, what does this mean for the thing that we want to deliver, as opposed to what does this mean for the next thing that we want to prototype? I guess that's maybe the difference in thinking is how is this contributing to the thing that is going to go in front of the general public when this thing goes live?
What really frustrates me is that I don't believe that is something, that way of thinking, it can be learned for sure. And we all do learn as we go a little bit.
Yeah.
But there are just incredible people that I meet when I'm teaching at a college, for example, where you just know the way that they're looking at something means that that's what they're great at. And it seems such a shame that we have to wait 5 or more years for that to be unlocked in an individual. And there's this lack of an opportunity to be able to take that raw talent that's there and go, that brain is already pointing in the right direction. How do I amplify that? How do I get the most out of him now as a result?
It's a funny one, that. I mean, to give you an example of that, I've got someone who does some work with me as work experience when they're not in school holidays, and they are an absolute genius and quite frightening at times. I mean, they need steering, and that's always quite fun. Their brain is sometimes a little bit 17, but that's funny. But I would, this particular person, I would give them a job in a heartbeat, without a shadow of a doubt, and without a second thought. I'm almost gutted that they want to go to university. But by the same token, I almost feel like that's maybe me putting my vision for them on them instead of allowing them to grow and sort of make their own experience, because that's what really makes the difference, I think, is everybody's individual experience coming together. So my experience is mine, your experience is yours. This particular person has yet to have their experience. Yeah, I almost, selfishly, I really want to sort of like just get them under my wing and go, this way, go, because you're amazing. but that would deny them the possibility of kind of like making their own mistakes and learning their own stuff. And frankly, let's face it, experience is the sum total of all the mistakes you've made, isn't it? To coin the trite phrase.
For sure. Would you say that part of your responsibility then as a head of a team is to be acknowledging those things, but be able to put forward those opportunities to someone and say, I really think that this could be great for you, but also to not push in the direction that they might not necessarily want to go in, and help support them in where they do want to go?
Yeah. See, that's a fine balance, isn't it? Especially when you have people working for you, because I do want to push people a little bit beyond their comfort zone, because that's how they grow. At the same time, I don't want to put them into something that's so uncomfortable that they are just going to hate it. I think the way I've approached that, because it has happened, and the way I've approached that is to gently nudge them in the direction of escaping their comfort zone a little bit. And then when they complain how much they hate it, then spend a bit of time with them understanding what it is that they hate and helping them to think of what strategies they want to put in place to kind of get around that.
If you were to be talking to someone who is going to be doing your job at some point in time, what are the skills that you have learned in the various different failures that you've had? Your being in your 20s and being a manager, being in your 30s and being a manager. What are the skills that you've pulled out of there that haven't got anything to do with the work, the practitioner end? It's to me, it feels like it's more these soft skills that you just don't get taught. They're not part of the here's how to do an open close cards, or this is how you do user interviews.
Thing number one is don't automatically assume that just because you are doing this particular job, people will automatically listen to you. I think some people kind of make the mistake of thinking I'm a user researcher, therefore people will listen to my research findings, and it's not as simple as that. So my first piece of advice for anybody is understand the language that your team speak, spend time with the developers and kind of understand what they mean. I think a lot of problems that come from or that come into research and design tend to come from this idea that developers will automatically just understand what they say. And that's not true, because developers have their own language. And if you treat developers as kind of like your users as well, and you are communicating your ideas to them, just telling them isn't enough. You need to understand how they think and communicate that in a way that works for them. And that only comes with practice. And you've got to make a terrible mess of it several times. And by the time you get a version that works, you'll have gone through about 10 or 15 different PowerPoint ideas and slide deck ideas and video clip ideas that have all gone in the bin because they just haven't worked. And it can be really frustrating. So perseverance, I guess, is the second one, because this stuff is worth doing. If you're building properly a user-centered service, then you need to be persistent about how you're communicating the stuff that you're doing back to your team and making sure that gets done, and then you're taking it back out again and then feeding it back to them. And almost there's an element of ego stroking. There's also an element of not being afraid of the fights that you're bound to have. So I guess that leads on to the third thing, which is don't take this personally. Again, I think I've seen quite a lot of people assume that they're not listening to me, therefore it's me. And that's not the case. It's just that they are doing their job and they're really passionate about the things that they do. And they're used to working in a certain way. So some tattooed idiot like me turning up and telling them that, no, you've been doing it wrong this entire time, this is what users really think, that just ain't going to cut it. So yeah, just maybe think a little bit more about that and about the fact that, they don't hate you. They're just having their ways of thinking challenged. And that's hard for anybody. Nobody changes automatically. So I guess I banged on a little bit there, but I think those are the key things. So what have we got there? Communication, persistence, and don't take it personally.
Would you say that those are the same sort of values and characteristics that you need to bring into the kind of the management side of it as well? So the responsibility of people.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it is personal. Sometimes it might well be. I mean, I've done terrible jobs of management before where it's been very much personal. And to be fair, it was probably right. Yeah, I think I came over, shall we say, slightly fascistic in my much, much younger years, just assuming I'm your boss, therefore you will listen to me. And it's just nonsense. Yeah, absolutely. So I think these days, I do need to be persistent. The people who work for me are absolutely worth investing in. Sometimes they may act against their own best interest, or I may feel like they're acting against their own best interest. So there's a little bit of a challenge to kind of help them overcome that and look at things in a different way. And that, I might be wrong. I've learned so much from the people who work for me as well, which is brilliant. That's the way you want it. I'm living the dream really here, but absolutely not take things personally. They're not having a go at me. They're kind of having a go at the way things are put together. And that's always quite interesting because that's a good opportunity for me to think, well, hang on, could we do this thing a little bit differently? And what would the effect of that be? Like, I don't know, it's almost like a user researcher's approach to things.
Right. If only someone could do that kind of thing of just some stakeholder interviews with your team to find out what they need.
I know, imagine. Can you imagine what a perfect world that would be?
Fantastic. Well, watch this space. Thank you so much for joining us today on this. If people wanted to find out more about what you are doing, where could they go?
They could go to a couple of places. They could go to hippodigital.co.uk, which is our website. They could follow me on Twitter, which is at Mark Brani, Brani. You can also find me on the usual Facebook nonsense, LinkedIn, etc. But yes, please do get in touch. Talking is what I do, and listening is what I do, and this is basically my hobby, and I get paid for it.
Wow, how good was that? Not bad for the first day out. Really hope that you've enjoyed what you've heard today and that you'll subscribe. Turns out it's actually pretty easy to get your podcast listed in all of those good places. So you can find us at theuxcoach.com. You can subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and all the other things that begin with an S that make it really difficult to record audio. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another great interview from another talented person from the design and user research community. So why don't you keep it locked at theuxcoach.com and find us on Twitter, and let's carry this conversation on. Until next time, this is Andy Parker, signing off.